Hi, and welcome to the Captioned Life, a show for the most casual and dedicated fans of comics and a member of the Comic Watch family. I'm your host, Sean. Join me and discover what the world of comics and graphic novels have to offer. From one-on-one interviews with industry professionals, roundtable discussions with passionate fans, and reviews on the latest comics, TV shows, and movies. Now let's dive right on in. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. Now that we've just had Black Panther Wakanda Forever released in theaters, I thought this would be a great time to look back and reflect on Phase 4 of Marvel Studios. Now, I know that technically Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special is also part of Phase 4 and it hasn't been released yet, but I think we can still do this episode and serve it justice. As always, I love to bring people on the show to have these discussions. So to help us look back on and review Marvel Studios Phase 4, please welcome Tara TK Kearns. TK is an educator, pop culture enthusiast, and host of There Was an Idea, a Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, in which she analyzes the MCU's big ideas with guests of various backgrounds and perspectives. TK, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Sean. I'm super excited to talk to you about the MCU tonight.
Yeah, same here. And I have to say that I am really glad to have you on because your podcast is one of my favorites that I love to listen to, because what I think is really great about your podcast is not only do you do a review analysis either by yourself with a guest, but you bring in a lot of great, interesting humanities perspective to it. And I think that's part of your background as an educator, but you always seem to really bring in a really interesting perspective and a little bit of a background on looking at the bigger picture from the humanitarian perspective on things. And so I'm really excited to have you on to kind of talk about a little bit of those things as well, too.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I've appreciated working with you over on There Was an Idea as well. And this is really exciting.
Well, good. Well, like I have on my let me start that again. Hold on, let me mark something here real quick. And here we go. Okay. So just like every episode for our guests, I always like to ask them their origin story when it comes to comics. But since we're also talking about the MCU, I want to ask you, what is your comic book and MCU origin story? What is there like a person or events that got you into it? Tell us a little bit about what got you started into those fandoms.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I wasn't a comics reader, but I was really into, for lack of a better word, like geeky stuff and fan and stuff. And I was always a fan. And thinking about it, if comics had come my way at a young age, I think I would have really gotten into them because I loved to read and I loved stories and video games and superheroes and any kind of character building stuff. And so something that's come up on my podcast a couple of times when thinking about my origin with superhero world in general is that when I was very, very young, I saw the movie Batman Forever and watched that VHS tape so many times. And I just fell in love with that character, Batman, and that world. And my brother and I, we played a lot of video games that had Batman and Justice League and X-Men and all of that. And for some reason, I didn't have the comics, but I obviously got into the X-Men movies and the Spider-Man movies, the Raimi Spider-Man movies. For comics, I did start to religiously follow the Buffy the Vampire Slayer season 8 run when that came out.
Yeah.
That may have been like 2005, 2006. I'm not entirely sure, but it was after that series wrapped in 2003. And then it kind of, they continued the story in comics format and it was considered to be canonical. And I was just so excited about that because that was my favorite show ever. And so since that time, right. So I really got into the MCU then when the MCU came out. And it wasn't until I was podcasting about the MCU, which I started in 2020, that I started working with people who would recommend comics titles to me. And I really, really got into the Hawkeye comics and the Fraction, Matt Fraction Hawkeye comics. And from there, kind of, read a few runs like the classic Civil War run and things like that. So I'm always open to suggestions. And yeah, I know for some people it's a background with the comic book characters that brought them into the MCU, but then for me it was really digging into the MCU that led me some more into comics. And Yeah, I another one that I've heard is really good that I haven't read yet, but I want to is the Iron Fist. I
Hmm.
forget the author, but have you read that?
Not, are you talking about the current run?
Maybe.
Yeah, I actually haven't read any of the standalone Iron Fist comics. I've read some comics where he's in it, but I haven't
Okay.
read any of the standalone. He hasn't been a character of mine that I've been completely interested in. But I've heard from some people that the current run of Iron Fist, I think, has been really interesting and that they've enjoyed that one.
Yeah, so maybe I'll have to check that out next.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and kind of like what you were saying with how Batman Forever kind of got you started in that, I think that's not a unique experience because I know for me, my exposure to superheroes was through the movie. So, Christopher Reeves as Superman was probably my first introduction as Superman as a superhero to myself and being one of my favorite heroes when I was at an early age. And then Batman 89 came out and I was always fascinated with all those characters and all those heroes. And then my personal story is I got into comics when my uncle introduced me to comics when I was about, I think, 8 or 9, and that's how I got into comics. But I already knew who like Batman and Superman and some of the other Marvel characters were just from the popular media that they were around. And
Right.
X-Men, I think, animated series was either around right before I got into comics or right after, or maybe just like right at the same time. And so I think that's a very common thing. But I love hearing how sometimes people get introduced to them in the media or like movies and film and TV, and then work their way back into comic books. And I think that's a great experience to go through that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things where I think that getting into the comics kind of gives you another perspective on how storytelling can be done because we're always used to the movies that when you look at the whole history of a particular character, it could be really interesting to see how the stories have changed over time and everything. So,
Absolutely. How much the context of the moment in which the character is being written influences how they come out on the page or on the screen. So it's
right.
fascinating.
Yeah. And I remember when Hawkeye came out, you and I had a lot of conversations about that because I had read the Fraction series a few years before the show came out. And I think you were just getting into it when the show came
Mhm.
out, if I remember correctly. I was really excited to hear your thoughts on it because it's been by far one of my favorite graphic novels and collection of series that Marvel's put out from any of them. I mean, I have a lot of favorites, but that's definitely on my top 5 list of, one of the best series I've read so far from Marvel too.
Loved it. I've reread it since. Like I've even got it on my shirt. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can
I
see
saw that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it so much.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's so good. So if you haven't read the story, I highly recommend it. It's on Marvel Unlimited if you have that subscription. I think a lot of comic shops still has the collection all in one book still. I've been seeing them at least in my local comic shops. They still have those. So there's a chance that you can go to a comic shop or even Half Price Books or a bookstore. They might have that as well too. It's a very popular run. So.
Mhm, mhm.
So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into phase 4. And we have a series of things that we're going to touch base on when we're talking about phase 4. And so, before we get started, I just want to remind everybody what are the projects that are up for discussion as we're doing this episode. So, I'm going to go through the list and remind everybody what the films from the phase 4 includes, and then the television series, and then also a new thing that has just kind of been a thing lately, and that's the special presentations that Marvel has been doing as well too. So all the films that are part of Phase 4 is Black Widow, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Eternals, Spider-Man: No Way Home, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Thor: Love and Thunder, and then Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Television series include WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, What If, Hawkeye, Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, I Am Groot, which is a series of animated shorts, I believe, and then She-Hulk Attorney at Law. And then we have 2 special presentations. The first one being Werewolf by Night, and then the second one is Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, which I mentioned before, that has not been out yet at the time of this recording. So we won't be able to talk about those, but that's technically part of the phase 4. So those are the list of all the projects that encompasses phase 4. TK, I want to ask you first, how do you think Phase 4 has been faring so far? Do you think it's been, just as good? Has it been missing some steps? Has it been, superior than what we've seen in the other Phase 3? Is it just, something different? It's not, better or less than, it's just unique and different. What are your thoughts on Phase 4 as a whole so far?
Yeah, it's definitely unique because for a number of reasons, but the big one that stands out is the Disney Plus factor, having those TV shows breaking into different areas beyond just those film events that the MCU has been so known for. I think that Phase 4 overall, it's included some of my absolute favorite moments and favorite characters I've ever experienced in the MCU. And it's also included some moments and some projects that I've personally been less than enthused by. And I think that it's been a very, very big couple of years. There's been a lot of projects that have come out.
Mhm.
Personally, I'm more partial to the projects from 2021 than I am to the ones from 2022 this year.
Mhm.
And in fact, I guess it was January, you and I and Ellie got together and we did an episode on There Was an Idea, that thinking about the year 2021 and kind of going through some of our best of the year. And at that time, all of us talked about what an awesome year that was for the MCU, and I still stand by that. I think that 2021 was absolutely just an incredible moment for this franchise and these stories and these characters. And since that time, I think, for me, the big thing that I spoke about in kind of that first year of Phase 4 was how much I appreciated the storytelling as being this bridge from bridging old and new characters taking on mantles. And I think moving into, the second year of the phase, I was expecting a little bit more of a destination on the other side of that bridge. And
Mhm.
I think that for me, I lost sight of some of the thematic thread a little bit. But then I also remember that there were three phases that built to Infinity War and Endgame. And yes, they were shorter and there weren't TV series mixed in there, but I'm really interested to see how Phase 5 is going to build on what has begun here in Phase 4. So um, I think the other thing that has been a thematic thread that I've really enjoyed over the course of Phase 4 has been this theme of I speak a lot on my show about that theme of identity and superhero stories as identity stories, but specifically
Mhm.
these characters having to come face to face with who they really are and aspects of themselves that they might not want to face. And we see that metaphorically so much in all these stories, but then in this phase we also see it happening so much in the literal sense, like the literal
Mhm.
manifestation of coming face to face with another Doctor Strange, or you think about Moon Knight, or you think about obviously Spider-Man
Mhm.
and things like that. So yeah, so those are some of the things that have been on my mind. But what about you? What do you think of Phase 4?
Yeah, so I find it very interesting, very similar to a lot of reasons that you had said. I think that it has a different kind of experience because phases 1 through 3 were just movies, as you mentioned, and phase 4 not only have the movies, but we also have the exclusive Disney Plus series that they've experimented with, as well as the special presentations. And what I
Mhm.
like about that is that I've told people I think it's a really cool risk that they took because it's a chance for them to tell new stories without really impacting the filmatic or the films that are part of the grander story of the MCU. So when you look at things like Hawkeye, or you think of She-Hulk, or even Moon Knight, if they never got another season or anything like that, it wouldn't impact the overall storytelling nature that's going to happen in the movies with the multiverse saga that we're going into. And so I think it's really cool to be able to tell those stories and do it in a more free way that they can really go with whatever direction they want to go, and they don't have to worry about how is this going to tie into the bigger universe. I mean, obviously they do in some capacity with each of the show that they connect it to, name dropping, different people or things like that. But if they were to, just kind of go big on something, they don't have to worry about did they just mess something up with the bigger, continuity or anything like that. So I think it's really cool for them to explore that as a storytelling opportunity. I think that what I've read recently is that Kevin Feige said that phase 4 is a lot about introductions, which is very similar to what phase 1 was, basically.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people are expecting phase 4 to have just been a continuation of phase 3. And I think that's been kind of a mistake to treat it as such, because everyone keeps saying, what's going to be the big thing. Like, we had the Infinity War, the Infinity Saga. Right now it doesn't seem like it's really going towards anything. And now we know that it's going to Secret Wars and all that. Secret Wars, and I forget what the other one is, the other Avengers movie that they're doing.
The Kang Dynasty.
Kang Dynasty, yes, thank you. So obviously, we just got confirmation that this year, and people knew we were kind of leading to that, but everyone was, I don't want to say everyone, but there was a lot of people that were, kind of expecting it to be a lot grander than what it already is, because they talk about, phase 3 had a lot of stuff going on. And I think that comparing phase 4 to phase 3 is kind of off the mark, and that we need to look at phase 1 more as, the comparable thing there as well too. But what I love about phase 4 overall is that they're taking a lot more risk, especially since there's been a lot of criticism about people saying that they felt like some of the movies kind of followed the same formula. Phase 4 has had a lot of different kinds of stories that they've been telling. I think, Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness is a great example of how they really went into the horror genre a lot. Shang-Chi I absolutely love, because that was a really unique story that we haven't had, that is a character that is really beloved, but it's not one of the main ones that you think about when you think about the Avengers and everything. And Shang-Chi was just one of my favorite projects from this film, or I'm sorry, from this phase, and is just I think they just took a lot of risk being able to tell different kinds of stories and be able to break away from that formula and being able to, just experiment with a lot of things. And so I think phase 4 is really a lot of risk taking, but also just a lot of wealth in terms of the kinds of stories that they can tell, and a lot of freedom with that as well. And one of the things I also keep in mind is that phases 1 through 3 was an 11-year process. When you look at phases 4, 5, and 6, I think it's about half of that.
Yeah.
So when you try to compare phase 4 to what's been going on phase 1, 2, and 3, I think we have to keep in mind that this is still fast paced, and there's a lot going on with phase 4 that we're not experienced, that we haven't experienced in the first 3 phases because of that. And that this is all, kind of crunched down into a shorter timeline as well too. Part of it's because of the pandemic, but I think part of it is just that they're able to tell more stories than ever before, because of the opportunities that Disney Plus has presented them as well too. So I think phase 4 has been just a lot of risk taking, and a lot of it has really paid off. And some of it, I think, didn't necessarily hit the mark, but it wasn't off of it either. But I really just love the fact of being able to watch it and just see how they're experimenting with a lot of this stuff, and then what they were able to create and produce from that. And then be really exciting to see, what they're doing when they go into phase 5. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're using the term risk taking, because that's been so great to see. And to your point, I think the Disney Plus aspect has just maybe offered a little bit more freedom to break out of that so-called formula, and working with new directors, and telling the stories of characters who might be from areas of the world, or might have different types of backgrounds that we hadn't seen previously in the MCU as well, and just expanding in that way that different types of characters who are being represented in the storytelling has been so cool to see.
Oh yeah, definitely. I agree completely. And I think this is just something that we've been wanting to have kind of at the beginning of it, but I love that they eased into this, and then now they're splintering off into all these as well. So,
Totally.
so now that we talked about what we thought about as a whole, let's do a segment that I call rapid fire superlatives, which is basically just kind of going through and talking about very quickly some of our favorite things. And I have a list of questions or a list of favorites that we're going to touch on. And the idea is that we'll just kind of each spend maybe a minute. We won't go into a deep dive necessarily just because there's so much. But we'll just kind of share like what our favorite thing was about it, and then just kind of move on to the next one. But in addition to that, not only are we going to share our own, I've also asked our listeners to share what their own favorite superlatives were as well too. And so I want to thank everybody who shared the responses. And so from Twitter, we have the ODPH podcast that shared, Beyond the Fandom, Metalcore Nerds, Tony from MCU Rewind, Friendly NBHD By, and SWO Productions. From TikTok, we had Paperweight Entertainment, Mr. Marvel 613, and Marvel.twin. From Discord, we have Supnep, and from Instagram, we had John's Comics with Kids and Baron_Hendrix. They all submitted some of their favorites. I'm going to read them as we go through this as well too. So thank you all for submitting them. So the first one I'm going to ask you, TK, from Phase 4, who was your favorite hero?
I got to go with Kate Bishop. I think she was the most successful bridge character to speak to that quality I was talking about before. She's just this regular person who's choosing to fight the good fight like Clint Barton before her. And I just loved seeing her story play out in the Hawkeye series.
What's funny is my favorite hero actually was Clint Barton.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, both of us have said that, Hawkeye was one of our favorites. And I absolutely love Kate Bishop, and I love Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop. I've always said that if she got that role, I think she would do an amazing job. And I feel like she absolutely fulfilled that. But I love Clint Barton just, for a lot of personal reasons is, as we both said, we love the Fraction run. But also with my own personal journey of being a father and also somebody who suffers from hearing loss, it was really cool to see Clint kind of going through that and the audience be able to see that. But also, Clint is like one of the first people we get to see aside from Natasha, which we can talk about a little bit, but the first time we get to see him have his own story, because he's always been kind of a tag along character with the other movies and other projects as well too. So I was very happy to see that. So that's why that was one of my favorite. He was one of my favorite heroes from the Phase 4. So I'm sorry.
I love it.
Yeah. So our listeners who submitted their favorite heroes, some of them have said Winter Soldier, Shang-Chi. One person said Spider-Man because Peter lost it all, literally everything, and he picked saving the world over his personal relationships. Okoye, Black Widow, She-Hulk, Falcon/Captain America. Someone said specifically Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, and the tie between Spider-Man and Moon Knight. So those are some of the favorite heroes that we got from our listeners. Let's go ahead and dive into favorite villain. What's your favorite villain, TK?
So I'm going to go with Namor from Black Panther Wakanda Forever, who is like Killmonger before him, a complicated antagonist in the film, and arguably, not straight up villainous, although there are certainly some villainous things that he does in the film. I've only seen this film twice at the time of this recording. It came out relatively recently, but I just was immediately taken with this character. Tenoch Huerta Mejia, his performance is just so dynamic, and the character design is so cool, and the entirety of the world of Talokan, and how this represents it's a new character in a new realm for the MCU. So I loved his backstory, and really, really enjoyed him as an antagonist.
Yeah, definitely. I know a lot of people have been loving Namor in the MCU. There's been a lot of discussions about, is he a villain or is he anti-hero? And it's very highly debated, which I find really interesting. For me, it is Wenwu from Shang-Chi, because I thought his, first of all, the actor that played him was fantastic. And I think this was actually his first English-speaking role, if I remember correctly. And the character as a whole, I found very fascinating and very intriguing, because, I know Marvel likes to not paint their villains as, black or white, and kind of give them a little bit more depth by kind of creating empathy around them. But I feel like when Wu had a lot of empathy from the audience going in, because from the whole movie, you didn't really get that sense that he was necessarily a villain with bad intentions. It was more of, he had all the right intentions and good intentions, but didn't really live up to the consequences of his actions, and didn't really claim them as his own. But I felt that his character was just so compelling and was just really fascinating to watch through, that even though he was making some, wrong choices, you could tell that he was really somebody who was a person of love, especially when it comes to his family. Even though, he did some horrible decisions, like trained his son to be the world's, most lethal assassin, things like that. I think it was just really fascinating to see how much of a, of a really deep and empathetic person that you can really have that connection with his character. And I just absolutely love that about him in the Shang-Chi movie. So other people who submitted their favorite villains, they also said Namor. One person said U.S. agent because he's the worst, and and he said a Lost Eternal, who are equally as bad. So I think this might have been two answers. Someone said Namor, but was he really a villain? Scarlet Witch, and Wenwu showed up a few times as well too. Somebody said Doctor Doom, but I don't think we've seen Doctor Doom yet. So I don't know if maybe they just meant like in the comics or something like that. So, but yeah, so favorite supporting character, TK.
For this one, I've got to go with Yelena Belova, specifically in Black Widow, although she was awesome in the Hawkeye series as well. But as I've spoken about before, the Black Widow movie was absolutely one of my favorite projects of Phase 4. And it was just a lot of what you said about Clint and that character resonating with you, and being able to see him in the spotlight for the first time really is how I felt about Natasha and Black Widow. And what an awesome bonus that you see the introduction of the Yelena character, who is going to move forward in the MCU, I think in such an awesome way. She was pitch perfect in terms of the balance of humor and heart in that movie. And Florence Pugh is utterly magnetic. So big fan of Yelena.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, that would have been my choice of supporting character before Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, because I absolutely love Florence Pugh as Yelena, and I think she has done a fantastic job in that role. But when Black Panther: Wakanda Forever came out, surprisingly, it's actually kind of a tie between the two. I will say who was a tie between, but who I ultimately went with is Queen Ramonda, and I think that was purely because Angela Bassett did a fantastic job of portraying her.
Amazing.
And M'Baku. But I ended up saying M'Baku for the reason that I saw a lot of character development from him in the first movie to the second movie, because in the second movie he was still kind of M'Baku in terms of person. Like, he still is that strong warrior and strong leader for his tribe, and has that comedic element to him. But he also served as an older brother figure for Shuri when T'Challa was gone, and tried to give some really wise and guiding advice to Shuri. And so I was really surprised and really thought that was a really cool way to kind of see that development, not just within a movie, but also from the first movie to the second movie, and see that as well too. So that ended up being my favorite supporting character, because you saw he added on more to that character as the cinematic universe progressed as well too, and as his role within the tribe has changed, his character has changed with that kind of leadership and everything. So that's why I ended up ultimately going with M'Baku, because I think he had a lot of development from the first movie all the way through what we've seen in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.
I love him.
Yes, and he was already one of my favorites in the MCU. Like, I absolutely love Winston Duke. He plays the voice of Bruce Wayne and Batman in the audio drama Batman Unburied. But Winston Duke, I just always find him. He always commands the screen. Like, whenever he's on screen, like, he just commands his presence, and you can't help but watch him the whole time. Like, he just does a fantastic job as an actor. So
yes.
Other listeners have submitted that Darcy from WandaVision and Thor was their favorite. Layla, aka Scarlet Scarab, was from Moon Knight. Mobius from Loki. Peter number 3 from Spider-Man No Way Home, Riri Williams, Red Guardian, and then Katie and Shang-Chi and Ned from Spider-Man No Way Home. So favorite duo, TK, who is your favorite duo from Phase 4?
Favorite duo has got to be Clint and Kate. And I know we already spoke about them a little bit, but maybe there's some Hawkeye bias coming out. But everything I said about Kate, everything you said about Clint, seeing them interact together, seeing that mentor-mentee relationship and the teaching and learning that they do with each other, and her going from this place of this kind of naive hero worship of him to really seeing him as a real person. And I just always think about that diner scene from episode 3 of Hawkeye when they're sitting there and she is talking about, she's got this like zest and this optimism, and he speaks to her about everything that you lose, that everything that you can lose when it comes to, choosing to be a superhero. And she talks about, well, those things that you gain as well. And they just play off of each other so well. And they have to be my number one pick.
I agree. And what's interesting is, for me, it's actually Kate Bishop and Yelena.
Yes.
Yeah. And for the reason, I think it's just that it wasn't a duo I was necessarily expecting them to have so much chemistry on screen, but I think they only had 2, maybe 3 scenes together in the whole series. And they were probably some of the best scenes that we saw in the whole series. And I just want more of them. So I really hope in the MCU moving forward that we get to see them interact with each other more, whether it's, in a movie or in a series, or even just doing like their own, buddy up type of series, like what we have in Captain America and Winter Soldier. I just love to see them more together, just because they were like a pleasant surprise. I was not expecting them to be such a, charismatic duo that we saw from any of the other shows or movies that we've seen as well too. So it's funny that we both chose Hawkeye, but 2 different pairings.
I love it.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I love it. I completely agree. And I'll never forget that mac and cheese scene.
Oh, no. I mean, oh my God. Yeah, we could go on forever about that. Yeah. Listeners have submitted Shang-Chi and Katie. Another person said Yelena and Kate Bishop. Thor, Mighty Thor, which is a great one. We have a couple more for Kate Bishop, Yelena. Somebody said Clint and Kate Hawkeye. Somebody said Wongers and Madison from She-Hulk. Which,
oh yes.
That's a good. Oh my gosh, that
Excellent.
I love that. Yeah, that was another great surprise. Sam Wilson and Bucky, and Stephen Grant and Mark Spector. So those are some really great duos. Let's jump into. I'm sorry, were you saying something?
I just said awesome.
Okay. Let's jump into favorite scene. Which scene was your favorite from Phase 4?
So my favorite scene from Phase 4 is still the same scene that was my favorite when we reflected on 2021. And it is a scene from WandaVision, which remains my favorite project of Phase 4. And I specifically love episode 8, Previously On. And the scene, I've talked about it on a few different podcasts, on my show, on MCU Need to Know, and it still hits me every time I revisited it. And it's Wanda revisiting a memory in which she and Vision are sitting in the Avengers compound shortly after the death of Pietro, around the time of the Civil War movie. And she's watching a sitcom. She's watching Malcolm in the Middle, and he comes in and sits there and is asking about, why it's funny that there's a character on the show getting injured. And she says he's not really injured. And he says, how do you know? And she just says, it's not that kind of show. And I just love the power of that line and the whole conversation they have, which of course culminates in the line, what is grief if not love persevering, is just this tender, awkward, beautiful moment between these 2 characters who are both learning how to, he's learning how to be human, and she's learning how to how to move on after the death of her brother, and the aspect of it that she in the present is watching the memory as well, and what that means to her. So it's just I think it speaks to the power of that show, and something about all of the qualities that I really love about WandaVision are distilled in that moment, and so it remains my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really goes into the core crux of, what it means to be human, like that human experience. And I think it
Yeah.
was really cool how they juxtapose, Wanda going through grief and Vision learning, the emotional side of being human. And so I absolutely love that scene. It's not my favorite, but it is a very powerful scene from Phase 4, and I think that ends up being one of the most compelling scenes that we've seen in the Phase 4, and maybe even of the MCU, because it's one of those things where it definitely stands the test of time. For me, my favorite scene is Hawkeye episode 3, the car chase scene. The episode 3 as a whole is my favorite episode of any of the series, but the car chase scene I absolutely love for a number of reasons, because it comes from it's clearly influenced from the comic that's based off of, which is what we talked about before, the Fraction Hollingsworth AHA run. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of influence that they've come from that. A lot of humor, a lot of very cool action scenes cinematography wise, because there was a lot of instances where you do like a 360 camera angle inside the car. But I just absolutely love it as an action scene, because they just did a really great job of being able to capture something that is very cinematic in a TV series, but also be able to take the comic that's based off of and kind of make it its own. So for example, one things I absolutely love is in the comic, they drove a 72 Challenger, which I can't remember if it was Kate's car or if it was Clint's car. But they drove that around and, banged it up a little bit in that scene in the comic. And then in the series, they had that same car in there, but they flipped it to where that's Echo's car. And even Kate wanted to try to steal it. And Clint, being the reasonable person, saying, I'm not going to smash up a 72 Challenger, because he knows the value and worth of that car and the history behind it. I just absolutely love just kind of picking that apart, because there's just a lot of small little things that were in there that I absolutely loved, that I thought was really great. Some of our listeners had said their favorite scenes was the mutant reveal of Miss Marvel, Shang-Chi getting the 10 rings, the 3 Spider-Man fighting at the Statue of Liberty. I know that's, that's going to be a historic moment, I think, for sure. Yelena meeting Kate at Kate's apartment. Any moment with Angela Bassett, Queen Ramonda, Wakanda Forever. I absolutely agree with that. A couple more of the Spider-Man at the Statue of Liberty. And I love the scene where the 3 Peters hugged at the end of No Way Home. So those are Spider-Man definitely ends up being favorite scenes for a lot of people. And I can see why as well, too, because there's just a lot of nostalgia. But it was just really cool. It was a really cool scene that they pulled off in that. So, yeah. All right. So favorite suit from the MCU.
Yeah, for this one, I'm gonna go with Shang-Chi, because I really appreciate how the way he's suited is it's fairly simple, and it's thematically resonant, because it combines his various influences and experiences, including the dragon scales from his mom's land of Talo, and then he's got his Air Jordans, representing his life in California. And it's simple, and it also says so much and really captures that character so well.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, and I really love that suit. For me, I actually ended up going with the Spider-Man integrated suit, which was the new like Iron Man suit that got integrated with the nanotech that Doc Ock gave him when he was giving back that piece that he, kind of took from him and all that. I thought that was just a really cool leveling up suit that they did in the MCU. And I like Spider-Man as a casual fan. Like I wasn't somebody that really got into the comics. But I watched the movies when they came out and I really enjoyed it and everything. But I thought that suit was really cool just to kind of see the upgrade and the change that went with it. And it just looked really cool on screen. So before I get into our listeners' favorite suit, I just have to say I apologize because as I'm going through these responses from our listeners, I realized I've actually been skipping a few on each of the categories because I did not scroll down far enough in each of these. So I'm going to try to go back real quick and kind of list some of the ones that I missed here. So going back to favorite hero real quick, some people had said Loki and Black Panther, and somebody had said Hawkeye for many reasons and list some great reasons. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to read them all right now just because I don't want to add on too much. Favorite villain, Green Goblin had listed that I did not mention. For favorite supporting character, somebody said Wong, and another person said Okoye because he's a strong lawyer warrior who I look up to. Truth be told, I would love to be part of the Dora Milaje, which I think a lot of us would. Favorite duo, Daredevil and Jennifer Walters was one, which I absolutely love those two as well. And then favorite scene, a few that I had accidentally skipped was She-Hulk jumps through the Disney screen. That was a great scene, actually. I literally thought my TV was broken when that happened. I got to admit, like, we thought something went wrong, but that's because it happens all the time to us. So I legitimately thought that something went wrong with our screen when that happened. And then Multiverse of Madness, when Wanda 616 is on her knees crying and Wanda 838 places her hand on her cheek and tells her no, that they'll be loved. So I apologize. I think we got all caught up now, so I apologize I left those off. But going back to favorite suit from all of our listeners, Moon Knight, which that was a really cool suit, especially when he, called for it and everything. It was really cool how they do the wraparound and everything. Sam Wilson, Captain America's suit, I love that because it's from Wakanda and it just looks really cool in general. And I did love his suit a lot. Shuri's Black Panther suit, Miss Marvel, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, because it was good to see again. Falcon and Cap, Falcon as Cap. The new suit at the end of No Way Home. The alternate Loki running for president, which was great. White Vision and Shuri's Black Panther suit. So all great ones.
Nice.
All right. Favorite line from the Phase 4 MCU, TK? What's your favorite line? And part of me thinks I know what it is because we kind of talked about it, but I'll let you say what it is.
I'm going to pivot actually.
Oh, of course you would.
I wanted to, in doing this, I wanted to actually have an opportunity to chat a little bit about as many of the installments as possible and try to spread the wealth a little bit. And so rather than choose a line from that WandaVision scene, which includes a couple of beautiful lines there, I'm going to pivot to the character Druig in Eternals. Which is a film that I really, really love. And it's so different and risk-taking for the MCU, as we spoke about before. And now that it's a year on since that film came out, I really am struck by how much it still really holds up for me and resonates with me. And the character Druig was my favorite. And he's got so many great lines that I think really capture him and some of the central conflict for the Eternals in facing this mission that they're on and re-examining their purpose. And he so there's a few of them, but I love when he says without their flaws they wouldn't be human. I love the part when he says 7,000 years, look at where you've got us. I've watched humans destroy each other when I could stop it all in a heartbeat. Do you know what that does to someone? And then when he's speaking with Cersei and Cersei's talking about the deviants and she says something like, they have a conscience now and that makes them dangerous. And he just says that makes them us. And just so poignant and profound, these lines that he has. And so I wanted to have an opportunity to talk about that character and some of those lines from Eternals that really resonate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. Druig has, I think he gets overlooked sometimes in that movie. I think because of his character being so different in terms of point of view for humanity than the other Eternals have as well. But you're right. He has some really great lines and great philosophical insights on, humanity and things like that. So I agree completely. That's a really good line. For me, it's from Shang-Chi again, and it's when Wenwu is having dinner with both of his children and Katie, and he's talking to Katie and says, names are sacred. They connect us not only to ourselves, but to everyone who came before. And I thought that was just a really, really powerful line. And it, and I think it's rooted a lot with Chinese tradition, if I remember correctly, because I know, names have a very, significant meaning when they're naming their children. And I think what was really cool about this is in the movie at one point, Shang-Chi had made some sort of comment about how he even tried to change his name and wanted to get away from his father, but can never really, get away from him. And I think that goes back to, when we were talking about how, names is a huge part of who we are, and that it's not just something that's arbitrary that somebody gave us, but it connects us to, just like what you said, like all the people that came before us and how they have those significant meanings, and how it is a part of our identity of, trying to think of, if I'm called, someone other than Sean, like if my name was something different, it's really hard to kind of go by a different name and kind of think like how that would change. But I can see how, that is a huge part of my identity. I think that was just a really great insight to the character of Wenwu, and how he kind of talks about how something as, seemingly small like that, it has a huge significance. And again, it goes back to his love for his family and how he sees that being a huge part of their identity. So that was my favorite line from the MCU Phase 4. Our listeners has said their favorite lines is, "Oh, great, it's another random guy from Spider-Man No Way Home." Norman's on sabbatical, honey. What is grief?
Good.
Yes, that's well, and not to get too far away, but that performance as Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, in this movie far surpassed any of the other ones that he did in the previous movie. It's just he did a fantastic job. He did so. What is grief if not love persevering? I'm a really good lawyer, Matt Murdock. I absolutely love that one as well too. And then another one for what if grief if not love persevering. Someone said Doctor Strange, I love you every universe, and someone said sorry Sean, because they know I'm not a fan of Doctor Strange, and that's totally fine. Just because I'm not a fan of it doesn't mean that you can't share that's a favorite line of yours. Aunt May giving the great power speech to Peter. Arthur Harrow from Moon Knight saying there's chaos in you. This is Queen Ramonda saying, I'm queen of the most powerful nation in the world and my entire family is gone. Have I not given everything? Wakanda forever. And then last one, you broke the rules and I become a hero, or you break the rules and become a hero. I do it and I become the enemy. That doesn't seem very fair. And Wanda Maximoff was the person that said that. So, all right. And then favorite fight scene, Tige. What is your favorite fight scene from Phase 4?
All right, this is a great transition because this is where I'm going to speak about the Doctor Strange movie a little bit. The music note fight scene between Doctor Strange. All right.
It's bound to happen. Yeah.
It's great. It's so completely unique and weird and visually dynamic, and it's just bizarre. I remember the first time I saw it in the theater, I was like, are they doing this? This is so strange. No pun intended.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I agree. And again, if you know me, I'm not a Doctor Strange fan, but I feel like I try to be objective as much as possible. And when it comes to fight scenes, that is definitely one of the highlights for me in Phase 4, because it is very weird, very different, but very cool, and still in the same kind of nature of, the magical world of Doctor Strange. And it was just so, as you said, visually interesting and engaging and just really cool to watch, how they're doing that in front of them. And like, who would have thought that in something like the MCU, that they would be able to pull this off and I think, do it well. I think that was definitely one of the best scenes from that movie, but also one of the best fight scenes just because of how interesting and different it is than anything else that we've seen before. So yeah, I agree with you completely. That's definitely by far my favorite fight scene of Phase 4. Our listeners have said Atuma versus Okoye, Wakanda Forever. Anything from Shang-Chi, the Shang-Chi bus scene, definitely. Mm-hmm. Thor's and the kids versus Gore's shadow creatures. I absolutely love that as well too. This person said, I'm a teacher, I have a soft spot for kids getting powers. And they also like Jane's triumphant sacrifice going out on her own terms. That is great. Uh, Makari versus Icarus and Eternals. Another one for the Shang-Chi bus fight. The apartment building fight with Green Goblin and No Way Home. Wenwu versus Xiaoling in the forest. Shang-Chi versus Wenwu, Shang-Chi on the trolley, Shang-Chi versus Wenwu, and Yelena Hawkeye at the New York ice rink, which that was a great scene as well too. But a lot of votes definitely for Shang-Chi. So, which that has a lot of great fight scenes, and I don't want to go too off board, but I think you and I have talked about how the fight scenes where Wenwu has with his wife, and then when we see it kind of replicated or mirrored with Shang-Chi, like that was just, it wasn't just a fight scene, it was a dance, and it was beautiful and just gorgeous as choreography. I thought it was fantastic. So all right, favorite tech. What was your favorite tech that we saw from Phase 4?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it a little bit already, but I was gonna mention the nanotech from No Way Home, and I love how Peter, the Stark technology and Peter being a techie kid is such an important part of the story, and I love how he was able to use the technology to find ways to cure the Doc Ock and and to utilize those technologies in trying to help the villains in the story. So I like that one.
Yeah, definitely. For me is I mean, it's no surprise it's from Hawkeye, but the trick arrows, because
Yeah.
even though we got the trick arrows from the other movies, the show, we got to see a lot of different kinds of trick arrows, and kind of got a little bit more dedication in terms of being able to not only to see them in action, but them becoming a thing in the show as well too. So Kate had to go get them from the compound from the New York Police Department. They you saw them making their own trick arrows. You saw Clint going through and kind of explaining what each one of them does, and having even like the comical ones. Kate shot the USB arrow at one of the tracksuit mafia, and I loved how when one of them gets hit, the other person screamed because he thought he got injured, and it just bounced off of him. So I love it just because not only was it just really cool tech, but they did a lot with it in that series. Our listeners said Stark Tech, Spider-Man Goblin web shooter, the TVA Tim pads and time doors. That was really cool. Clint's various arrows, White Vision, Wakandan technology, Sam Wilson's Captain America suit, Hawkeye's arrows, and Wakandan technology as well too. So, all right. And then last but not least, in the superlative category here, favorite vehicle. What was your favorite vehicle from this phase?
So coolest one is Riri Williams' muscle car in Wakanda Forever, and that chase scene, and then how it comes back at the end. Shuri fixes it up for her. That's the coolest. And then also just shout out to the fishing boat in Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Definitely.
I just love that scene when they're fixing it up together. It's very sweet.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, and yeah, no, that was a really cool scene. I really like that.
It's not actually used as a vehicle, so it doesn't really count, but it is a mode of transportation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a vehicle. Does it get used? No. And the question wasn't, favorite used vehicle, his favorite vehicle, it's so no, it totally counts. So for me, it was actually Black Panther Wakanda Forever. Nakia's like scuba propulsion, like diving propulsion vehicle that she has. I thought it was really cool because not only did it really serve as that, it was like really simple and straightforward and just really cool as a idea for technology, but it also served as kind of like a scouting vehicle for her, so she didn't have to like go in and kind of put herself out there first, but it could have done it on its own, and it served as kind of like a computer hub for her to be able to do other things as well too. So I thought it was a really cool and simple way of creating a vehicle that does a lot without making it look very complex or anything like that. Like obviously it is complex, but it was very simple in its design as well too. So I thought it was really cool. So favorite vehicles from our listeners. Somebody said the Eternal ship, which was really cool. Somebody said whales because of the Talokan riding the whales in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. The Jeep that took down the Hulk, Riri's car. So we had another one for Riri's car. Ironheart's ride in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. And somebody said it had a sleek design, and the action scene made it good. I think that may have been Oh no, that's about Ironheart's ride in Black Panther. That's what they were talking about. So yeah. So all right, so that is our superlative. So let's go ahead and talk about our favorite film, our favorite series, and then we'll wrap up with what we're looking forward to in Phase 5, and then talk about the comics that we're reading. So looking at Phase 5, what was your favorite film out of the entire series that you saw from? I'm sorry, from Phase 4. I apologize, but from Phase 4, what was your favorite film from that phase?
So I'm acknowledging potentially some recency bias, but as of this moment, I have to say it's Wakanda Forever. It's a film that, so I'm thinking about my other two favorites from the year, Black Widow and No Way Home. And Black Widow, it's this immensely personal story for the Natasha character, and really like lets us dig into her interior world a bit more. And I just personally, there's so much there that resonates with me. No Way Home, it's this spectacle, this event, this culmination of so much building. Somewhere in the Venn diagram of the qualities that those two films have is Black Panther Wakanda Forever. It's this personal story about loss and grief and just the interiority of Shuri, and not just Shuri too, but of Queen Ramonda and Nakia, even Okoye. Like there's just like the characters are so robust and the character work is so beautifully done.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is just this incredibly spectacular film to look at on the screen. The action is impeccable and the visuals are just outstanding, and it has that quality of being something that's big. It's simultaneously interior and there's an external something to it. So so
Mm-hmm.
that's my thinking at the current moment, that it's really the pitch perfect that captures both of those elements for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and I think one of the things that I love about it is that it's very emotional, and that you feel the pain and the grief through the person of Shuri, and that it just goes through like really hard the whole time. And so I think of all the movies that we had in Phase 4, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever was definitely the most emotional, both as a film in its own story, but also with what we brought to the film when we watched it as well. Um, for me, in terms of favorite film, I struggle with this one throughout the whole phase. And I think um, if I look at the whole phase four as in its entirety and looked at movies as its own thing and not looking at some of the other external factors here, um, I have to go with Shang-Chi. And the reason for that, what I mean by external factors, is that Spider-Man No Way Home I thought was a fantastic movie. But I also think that we brought in a lot of our own nostalgia with it because we were all wanting to see the three Spider-Men show up on film together. And I think that was part of the thing that kind of went into it, that had another movie did that, or let's say if this movie did it and we never had Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man or Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man before, then I think that it still would have done well, but it wouldn't have that as much of an impact because of those external factors that we're bringing into the movie by itself. Which is why I would say Shang-Chi was probably my favorite film of all of Phase 4, because it's a story all of its own that was very powerful, that it was one of the few that when I watched it over and over again, I kept pulling something new from it. It was like pulling back layers and layers that I hadn't noticed the first time. But then when I watched it again, or, I watched someone's, TikTok, like pointing something out or whatever, it's like every time I watched it, I learned something new that I didn't catch before that just made a world of difference in terms of meaning as a film that I just absolutely love. And I think Shang-Chi is just one of those films that will continue to surprise me each time I watch it, because I feel like I'm watching it again for the first time and I'm catching something new every single time. And like I said, I love the choreography. I love the story. I loved how they took the fight scenes and made them as a beautiful dance, basically, and that it has a lot of symbolic meaning. Because there are some movies that I've seen, martial arts movies, where it really is, it's not just a fight choreography, but it's definitely something that is, on par with dancing, and that it's an art form that they really take into consideration and think of like how they push things, but also use timing very well, and just use that as an opportunity to treat it as an art, as opposed to we're just going to beat each other up. And so there's a lot of things I love about Shang-Chi, that I think all the different components of the storytelling aspect of it was just so beautiful and just so well done, and that's why that's been my favorite film from Phase 4. So let's talk about favorite series. What was your favorite series from Phase 4?
Yeah, it's still WandaVision, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just and Hawkeye is a really, really close second for me.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just something to WandaVision that this moment in time in which it premiered, being the first Disney Plus series, being the first installment of Phase 4 that we saw, being the first MCU installment since the time of the pandemic and the all of the delays that brought,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about even outside the show itself, like just the community that sprung up around it, and people watching from week to week, and wondering what was happening, what was going on, like with these sitcom worlds. And it was just such a fun moment in time. It was such a fun moment to be podcasting and meeting people through this avenue. Um and in addition to that, the series just really, really, really holds up for me. I think that um, Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany are incredible performers, and just to see
Mm-hmm.
them in the spotlight in this series and playing off of one another, it I just the fun of the songs that they used for each of the different decades, and just Catherine Hahn as Agatha. It's got everything that I look for. It's got that heart, it's got that humor, and that poignancy, and then also that absurdity. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of WandaVision.
Yeah, I agree. And I think WandaVision set the bar high for the series for a number of reasons. Just like you said, it was the very first one that we got. They had 9 episodes. I think they hit it out of the park with the first 4 episodes, where they replicated some very popular TV series. And I love the fact that how the first, I think, 3 episodes, they'd use the square aspect because that's how
Mhm.
they watched it back then. So they could have done the widescreen if they wanted to, but they chose to kind of keep it as authentic to the show that they're drawing inspiration from as possible. And I will say, I absolutely love the scene where they brought in Evan Peters as Pietro, fake Pietro, in the series as well too. In fact, I just wrote an article for Nerd Initiative about my top favorite moments in series in the MCU, and I'll link that in the show notes as well too. And that was one of them, was Evan Peters showing up, because it was one of the few times that got an actual physical reaction from me, because I remember saying, "Oh my gosh!" Like, because I don't know if you remember this, TK, but was that even like leaked anywhere that that Evan Peters was going to be showing up in the show at all?
Not that I had seen.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And it was just really surprising. So, like, because almost every other movie or film or series that has come out since then, like, there's always been some sort of weird leak and all that. But that was a huge one, I felt like, that kept on the wraps. I'm really surprised that they're able to do that. So
Yeah.
um, for me, it's no surprise it's Hawkeye. I'm not going to go into it because I feel like I've already shared why I love it so much. But it's definitely one I'm going to watch again for the holiday. The holiday, sorry. It's definitely one I'm going to watch again for the holidays, and it's a fun show. It's very emotional. It's one that I just absolutely love because of so many things, and I know it's probably not what everyone thinks of in terms of like the best done show, but again, this is our favorite. So in terms of personal connection, because of everything that's in there, from the things I love about Hawkeye from the comics to how they handle deaf and hearing loss with Echo and Clint Barton, and just the whole pulling of Clint's sense of guilt and loss and how he's trying to make things right. And just that, just everything about that show I just absolutely love. So that's always going to be my favorite show from Phase 4. And I honestly, it's probably going to be tough to beat that one as a show because of just how much personal meaning it has to me. Just from a show standpoint, from a show standpoint of view. So and then I forgot one. I actually forgot a few, but I'm going to kind of group this into. I originally we're going to talk about most surprising character, most surprising project, most surprising scene. But I'm just going to say, like, what was the thing about Phase 4 that surprised you the most? It could be the character, project, scene, or it could be just something that in your mind you're just like, this is what surprised me the most about Phase 4.
Well, one of the things that you touched on it a little bit already, but I wanted to have an opportunity to briefly talk about She-Hulk, the character of Jen Walters and the She-Hulk show, which it was not, it's not necessarily fair to call it a surprise for me because I was expecting to like her as a big fan of Tatiana Maslany, but I was just surprised by how far that show took it with the meta narrative and that breaking the fourth wall moment to the extent of breaking out into the Disney Plus menu and walking around the Marvel Studios headquarters and the Kevin, which was just so. I think one of the first things that after I watched that She-Hulk finale, I texted Trey and Jude from MCU Need to Know and was just like, wow, I'm really surprised they took it that far and pleasantly so. I just love how silly and absurd that show was and just how much that character they just went for it and I thought she was awesome and she somehow like even though she represents something different for the MCU, I feel like she fits and yeah, so I was just really pleasantly surprised by everything having to do with She-Hulk.
Right. Yeah, and I've heard from people, I've not read the comics, but I've heard from people that that's actually something that has been done in the comics where she broke out of even the comic book in some fashion or something like that and did something very similar to that as well too. Um I think for me what was most surprising is Wanda's character because at the end of Phase 3, she essentially became an Avenger, right? And she's had kind of a change from Age of Ultron from what she was doing to, now being part of the Avengers team. And then we got WandaVision, where she was suffering from all the loss and the grief from losing, Vision, and then having to lose her kids and Vision again. And then we got Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness, and she became a villain, which I know they explained because she was interacting with the dark hold for so long that it kind of took over her and everything. But I think a lot of people have just want to see Wanda, just to be happy, I guess, in general. But I think it's just we've had I would just say that we've had enough of Wanda being kind of the villain in the series that because of all the things that she had suffered through and all the things that she had to go through, I think we don't want to see her be the villain. I think we want to see her have hope. And I'm hoping that, moving forward, if they bring Wanda back, which I'm sure they will, that they will give her kind of a happy ending at some level that will kind of bring her back into being on the good side on some level. And I know she made, some of those, bad decisions and that she took over a town and everything like that. And no one's ever condoning that sort of thing. But I think as a story, people are just wanting to see Wanda, not being treated as the villain so often and write her in as a villain so often. And that we want to kind of just see the opposite happen for her. We don't want to see her as a villain. With that being said, who knows that they bring in the House of M into the MCU and talk about her either getting rid of mutants or bring in mutants or however they do that. That is kind of borderline on that level, but I think that her character treatment has been really surprising in Phase 4, and that it almost just seems like she just keeps kind of going back and forth between, and that she doesn't really have a good side or bad side. It's just more of a moral gray in how they've been telling her story. So yeah, so with that being said, let's talk about Phase 5, what we're looking forward to the most, moving forward. Now that we're heading into Phase 5, I'm going to get our first film, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So what are you looking forward to the most with what we're going to see in Phase 5 here?
So I'm really looking forward to seeing the Kang character, Jonathan Majors, coming back and seeing kind of the next steps with that. So that trailer for Quantumania looks really great. And then so that thread, I'm excited to see where that thread goes. And then in terms of individual projects, there are so many that I'm really looking forward to. But I gotta say, specifically right now, the one that's standing out to me is Thunderbolts. I think they announced Thunderbolts for Phase 5 and not Phase 6, right? I think so.
I think so. I think Phase 6 is still kind of vague right now. I think it's only been like a few things, like the two Avengers movies,
Yeah.
and Fantastic Four, and I think that
Okay.
might be the only thing but I could be wrong on that. But I'm pretty sure that everything else has been Phase 5. So
Okay, that's what I thought too. I just wanted to double check, but
yeah,
yeah, Thunderbolts. It's the closest thing that we'll probably ever get to a Black Widow too. So with the Elena and Red Guardian and Taskmaster, and to see Bucky come back and the John Walker character, these are all characters that I really enjoyed in the previous projects, and especially seeing Elena back in on the big screen and Bucky. I'm just really looking forward to where that's going to go.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, Phase 5, I will say that Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, that's probably going to be the kickoff to everything that's been in motion so far. So everything in Phase 4 has been kind of putting things into motion. And then I think that movie is just pretty much going to, finally kick the can down the street, like everything has been just kind of setting up for it. And then seeing Kang show up in Ant-Man Quantumania is going to be kicking off. But for me personally, what I'm most excited about is seeing Daredevil again. Not only have we seen Daredevil in a show and a movie, which I absolutely love Daredevil and Jennifer Walters and She-Hulk. I think they had great chemistry together. What I'm absolutely excited about is Daredevil getting his own show again in the MCU, but he's getting 18 episodes. So I'm really curious to see why that is and what their plans are for it, because so far the series that we've had has only been 6 episodes or 9 episodes, like with WandaVision. So this is going to be the series that has the most episodes promised. And so I think there's a plan for it. I don't know what the plan is. I don't know if it's like an experiment or if it's supposed to be coinciding with what's happening in the MCU at the same time. I'm not sure, but I'm very excited to see that, and that we're going to get Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin again. And I'd be really interested to see what storyline they're doing, because it's called Born Again, which is based on another run in the comics. But they kind of did that with season 3 in the Netflix series. So I'm kind of curious to see what their plans are for Born Again and what that is. If it's just, it just happens to have the same title, but it's a different story, or if it's just supposed to be, we're going to do like season 3 again or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. But I'm very excited to see Daredevil have his own series and, potentially see him in more movies. I can see him popping up in a lot of other series and movies because of his role as a character in the MCU and just what they need right now as well. So that's why I'm looking forward to with Phase 5. So, before we start sharing what comics we're reading, is there anything else that you want to share about Phase 4 that maybe we didn't get to touch on that you were really hoping that we get to talk about?
No, I think this was a really great way, that the structure that you had here and going through the superlatives, like, was a really great way of being able to touch on most of the projects and just acknowledge the bits that we liked from all of them, and especially hearing from some of the listeners as well. I think I didn't speak as much about Ms. Marvel or Moon Knight, and just to note that I really enjoyed those shows as well.
Mm-hmm.
And for the categories we were looking at, I didn't necessarily, there weren't specific moments or things like that stood out, but I did really enjoy those series. And I would say, of the two, probably especially Miss Marvel, I really appreciate what they did with the storytelling there and some of the visuals. And yeah, so all in all, looking back on it, reflecting on it, I really think there's a lot to be excited about from this phase.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, and I was hoping one of the reasons why I structured it this way, and this is a brand new structure for me doing this, is that I was hoping that we can get a lot in a shorter amount of time. And
Definitely.
like, we're almost at an hour now. So obviously, but we still got a lot in. I would say we still got a lot in. I think we got 20 different things in a short amount of time for each one versus, 3 or 4 things on a, more deeper level and all that. But I will say I agree with you in that I didn't touch on all the shows. Like for example, Miss Marvel was one I really enjoyed, and I love the comics of Miss Marvel. And in the article that I mentioned earlier as well, too, one of my top 5 moments from Phase 4 in the series was when Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel does the switch, because I absolutely love that for so many reasons. And one of them is that it's a great connection with how we see Miss Marvel as a fan of Captain Marvel, and that was something that was straight from the comics. But unfortunately, like the questions I wrote here, like just didn't really pull out as one of my favorites, to be able to say like something from Miss Marvel was one of my favorites because it was something else, unfortunately. But just like you said, I loved all the shows. I wasn't a fan of a couple of them, but I still thought in and of itself, they did a great job of it. It just didn't really resonate with me necessarily. So yeah, so I agree with you completely. Is had we had more questions or just, went through each show and all that, we could definitely hit on what we loved and all that. But unfortunately, there's only so much time to talk about those things. So okay, so let's dive into comics that we're reading. So as guests, I wanted to ask you first, what is a comic that you're currently reading or that you're getting ready to get into? What do you want to share with us, what you're reading right now?
Yeah, so currently I'm not reading any comics at the moment, but I am currently rereading a graphic novel with my students. Actually, we read it with our ninth grade students every year, and it's called American Born Chinese, and it's by Jean Luen Yang, and it's
Oh,
this
cool.
really, yeah, it's a really really great identity story about transformation, coming of age story, and we do it with our students around looking at the hero's journey. And I mention it here too because it's soon going to be adapted as a Disney Plus series that's going to be
Oh,
directed
that's
by,
right.
yeah, it's Destin Daniel Cretton, who was the director of Shang-Chi and will be directing the upcoming King Dynasty movie. So it's
Mhm.
related in that way. And if any listeners haven't read that graphic novel, I do highly recommend it because it's very rereadable, and it's got so much in it that's really, really beautiful. And I'm excited to see what they do when they translate it to the screen too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and the author has done some work as a writer for some of the other Marvel comics as well too. But I'll definitely make sure to find a
Yes.
link to that graphic novel and put in the show notes as well too, because that sounds really interesting. That's really cool. So I love
Yeah.
that. What so
Thanks.
you say your students are reading this, and you say it's your ninth grade. What class is it for again?
So it's a humanities class, which is a blended social studies and English class. So it's
That's right.
it's technically, a text that they're reading as part of their English class, but there's connections as well because we learn about belief systems and the role of belief systems in the ancient world, and there's connections there with some of what's presented in the text, and
Mhm,
obviously we learn about classical China, and there's connections there too. So it's
mhm.
it's a really great text for our kids, and they love it too. Like they all really get into it. So
Oh, I love
highly
that.
recommend it.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure all of our listeners are probably, are really supportive of this, but I know there's a huge push in education about using graphic novels and comics as source
Hmm.
materials to be able to have conversations and to look at the past and also look at, historical events and things like that. And that's a really great medium to be able to share that as well too. So that's great to see that that's being used in the classroom. So awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
For me, I actually just got done reading this comic here called Batman One Bad Day, Mr. Freeze, which I don't know if you're familiar with this series or not. Um,
No, it looks great.
yeah. Yeah, it's so DC's been doing a series where they take a villain and it's like a 64-page story basically of a unique it's basically like a unique twist to something that seems like it's very similar to The Killing Joke, where it's a single story of a villain interacting with Batman and kind of, exploring a specific, story within the villain or maybe even a larger theme as well too. And Mr. Freeze has done really well. I wasn't a fan of the character art necessarily, but the story was just fantastic and was really a great read. And I highly recommend that one. I just finished reading Batman Beyond Neo Year, which is a 6 issue series. And that was really great. It's something that I've never read any of the other Batman Beyond comics before. I've only been a fan of the show, but I never read any of the other comics. But I absolutely love this series, and this was really interesting to read as well too. And then I'm getting ready to read some holiday specific ones as well. So
Oh,
um,
that's fun.
yeah. So that is what we're reading. And then we did have listeners that shared what they're reading right now. So from Comic Watch, Miriam Herrera said that she is reading a manga called One Piece, which she said it's slowly nearing the end, but that'll be like the next 5 to 7 years. So apparently it's taking a long time for it to end. Kevin Rossi, again from Comic Watch, said that he's reading Detective Comics and Miracle Man and possibly Human Target if he has time to get caught up. But he's also picking away at No Man's Land, which is a Batman story. And then Dustin Gable said that he is reading Zoe's Thurgood's It's Lonely at the Center of the World. It's a tour de force of the graphic novel medium, destroy conventions and format to convey raw emotion like no one else in comics today. From our Discord channel, Joe Loves Comics said that he read the 3rd volume of Walking Dead and the first issue of 7 to Eternity. Enjoyed both of them. For this week, Nightwing was fun, and he's excited to see the rest of the week's polls very soon. On TikTok, that nerdy Papa Bear said between his weeklies, he's binging IDW's Sonic the Hedgehog. Surprisingly fun. I wish I discovered it sooner. I've actually never read any Sonic comics. I've been a casual fan of Sonic. Like, I like the game, but I never really been intrigued by a story of Sonic, but this it sounds interesting if he said that it's really fun. He wish he discovered it sooner. And then on Instagram, John's Comics with Kids says that he's reading Wolverine and the X-Men by Jason Aaron, which he said was really good. Bumpkins TV said Dan Slott's Iron Man. He really likes that and is also caught up on the Dark Crisis tie-ins, but he didn't love those. And then the comic book teacher on Instagram said The Keeper by Doom Barnes. Haunting story, well-written and a bit of a rushed ending, though. So thank you for everybody who submitted what they're reading this week. And thank you, TK, for joining us. Before I let you go, can you tell all of our listeners where they can find you online if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called There Was an Idea, a Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast. It's been on a bit of a hiatus the past couple of months as I've been busy with some other aspects of life things, but I do have a pretty big back catalog of episodes. So please feel free to check that out. And if you'd like to find any updates or see some more information about me and the show, you can find me at @anidea_podcast on Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thanks for coming on the show again.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Awesome. And that wraps up another episode of The Captioned Life. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can follow us on social media at Captioned Life. For more information about us and all of our previous episodes, visit thecaptionedlife.com.